Hey, this is Andrew from Limitless, and the topic of this video is how to eliminate unwanted thoughts, behaviors, and emotions with the timeline release technique. And the remainder of this video, I'm on a call with somebody coaching them through the process of going through the timeline to release negative emotions. In general, you're familiar with the timeline. So the timeline is how your mind stores memories in relation to time. So everything that ever happened to you from the moment you were born until right now and into the future, your unconscious mind has a perfect recollection of every memory and emotion that's ever happened to you. And if you believe in past lives or in genealogy and stuff, your timeline could go into past lives as well if you're working with a client who has that belief system. So what the timeline release technique does is if you have an unwanted thought, an unwanted behavior, an unwanted emotion, before some trigger event which caused that to happen, that negative emotion or behavior didn't exist. So for example, if you were picked on when you were 5 years old, on that first event where that happened, you got picked on and you lost self-confidence. An hour before that happened, you had the confidence. So your body has a reset switch. So by using the timeline, you could float up out of your body, float back in time, look at that event, extract positive lessons and learnings, float an hour before the event, and looking through an eye, seeing, hearing, and feeling as if it's an hour before that event right now, you could reset your emotional and your emotional state to release that limitation. So in that case, you would have the confidence or whatever it is. I've worked with clients where they have anger or frustration issues where if something doesn't go their way, they get angry, and even though logically this behavior doesn't make sense, they still do it because this behavior served a purpose. So I worked with a couple clients who've done this where I had them float up on their timeline, imagine floating back in time and looking down at whatever event on their childhood. They didn't get some candy or they didn't get something their way, so they threw a temper tantrum. They got angry, they yelled, they screamed, and their parents eventually gave in and gave them the candy. So because of that trigger event, whenever things don't go their way, they display anger. So by using the timeline, we could release that limitation. So if something doesn't go wrong their way, like maybe they're at work or something, or if they're a boss or they own a business, they're not going to display the anger for their employees. They're not going to get mad at work. So a lot of times you have these limiting behaviors or limiting beliefs or negative emotions. If you were assaulted, sexually assaulted, you've been in a car crash, maybe your business partner stabbed you in the back or whatever it is, we have these emotions built up inside of us. And by using the timeline technique, then this allows you to release whatever the limitation is. So my question for you, like everything I said so far, do you have any questions with the general overview of that?
Yeah, so you work backwards, right? You start with a limiting belief or a limiting behavior, and then you go back through your timeline. You don't go to the timeline first.
Exactly. So like the first step is the timeline elicitation, where you want to understand how your mind stores the memories. So just like submodalities or how we access different pictures in our mind. When you think of an event that happened maybe a week ago, 6 months ago, 3 months ago, where is that memory stored in relation to your body? Is it behind you, to the left, or somewhere else? So two common timelines is you project your past being stored behind you, or you project your past to your left. So then you do like a future memory. Think of something you're going to do next week or like a month from now. As you think of that memory, where do you feel it's located? Is it in the front of you, to the right, or somewhere else? So I have a picture on the screen where one common timeline, I think it's the most common, is your past is behind you and your future is in front of you. Or the other one is your past to the left or the future to the right, where those are common ones, but there's all different options and everybody's an individual. So some people have like a V-shaped. One girl I know has like a spiraling staircase. So when you understand what your timeline is for you, you have a better understanding of how this works. So based with your question right there, is the very first step is start with what the problem is. So if say the example, if I work with clients who display anger, it's like, okay, I'm angry, I yell at my family when I get home from work. And if it's a limitation for them, that we start with the intent. Okay, that's where we start. And then the process we go into is think of that event and imagine floating up out of your body in the present moment, looking down at yourself, and just get a vision of everything you're looking at right now. And then imagine floating all the way back in time to the very first event in your life that triggered this emotion. And the important thing to realize here is if you try to think of a specific event, like, all right, I'm trying to think of something when I'm 3 years old, that's your conscious mind. So with your conscious mind, with thoughts, that gets in the way. But with the unconscious, what we're working with, you want to understand whatever picture, symbol, or scene naturally comes to mind. So imagine like you're just like looking down and floating back. Whatever comes to your awareness, that's what we begin working with. So I worked with one client where he claimed he had a gambling addiction, and he started gambling when he was 18. But the first thing that came to mind during the first step of the process, when he's 12 years old, he collected magazines. He collected magazines because he wanted to fit in, or I forget the specifics. But that's what first came into the awareness. Then we worked out the timeline on that. And that's kind of like a clue which led to something else. But eventually it went back to when he was 3 years old, and something happened when he's 3 years old, and that was the first event. So kind of answer your question more directly is you start with the intent, and then you float up, imagine floating back to whatever scene comes to your mind naturally, and then you go from there. So I'll go through more of the process, but based on what I said so far, is that clear, or is any questions pop up?
Yeah, it's clear. One question, you kind of answered it with that last description, but my question was, you said that on your subconscious mind, it's got a memory of everything that's happened in your life up to this point. Consciously, I can remember very few things that have happened in my life. So you just said, just kind of basically like go with the flow and just not think or not try to think about a specific event, and just whatever picture pops up in your head. How do you know when it's right, or how do you know when you've gone back as far as you need to?
So like I know with some people they have trouble accessing some pictures, but that being aside, that's like a separate thing. Like the example of the guy who went back to when he's 12 years old. We went through the full technique, which I'll explain. We did the release of the emotion, but there's still some emotion still there. So whenever that happens, or they can't like 100% feel that it's gone, that's a sign for me, based on my experience, that okay, there is some other root cause event before this, because we always want to go for the first event in their life. And then more with what you said as far as the conscious versus subconscious. The conscious mind are thoughts and like normal thoughts, and subconscious that always thinks in pictures and symbols. So whether it's like, okay, you bring up the mental picture in your mind for overcoming a junk food craving, like if you crave burgers, that picture in your mind, or with the timeline, it's always in pictures and symbols right there. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, so if I'm having a hard time picturing things, I'm trying too hard with my conscience.
With that, some people have stronger representational systems, and I'll talk about that in another video. So
Okay.
that's beside this. So this one's specifically for the timeline. And
All right.
if they have trouble picturing it, then I'll make another video on that. So back to the process. So you start off with the intent. So the anger or frustration, whatever it was, we'll go with that one. So you set the intent, you float up out of your body, and you float back all the way to the first event of your life where this happened. And for the purpose of this training, just assume that everything works the first time, and you always go back to the first one. You float back, and the picture comes to mind. You're looking down at that picture from above, and you see what goes on in that picture. So in this case, he wasn't getting food, or like the candy, and then he threw the temper tantrum or whatever it was. And the reason you hold on to the emotions or whatever is because there's some positive lesson or learning to be taken away from this. And so in this instance, when you're floating above whatever event it is, you want to extract the positive lessons or learnings away from it. So in this case, it means, okay, he could get what he wants without displaying the anger. There's other ways to doing it. And you could always tell a metaphor or a story to parallel their situation if you're helping a client through this. So you float up, you float back in time to the event, you extract the positive lesson learnings, and have the client store that in a separate part of their memory. And from there, what you want to do is have them imagine floating an hour before the event or any chain of events leading up to it. So if you're working with someone who is sexually assaulted, there's the event right there where a lot of negative emotions might come up. And in those instances, you have the client like float higher or do EFT to release emotions. But in that case, if they float an hour before, that still might be caught up in the chain of events leading up to it. So an hour before the event or any chain of events leading up to it where they felt okay. And then looking down at that scene, what you should do is have the client float into their eyes or into their body, looking through their own eyes an hour before, seeing, hearing, and feeling as if it's an hour before that event right now. And I always say, all right, see, hear, and feel as if it's happening right now, and feel those emotions of an hour before the event right now. And as you feel right now, where are those negative emotions? Where is that negative behavior? Is it gone? And 99 times out of 100, the answer is yes. And once they have that yes, I say hold on to those emotions and imagine floating back up on your timeline and float above that event and notice how you feel those good emotions now and how those negative emotions are still gone. And when I say that, I use presumptive language by saying, notice how you still have the good emotions and notice how the negative emotions are still gone, instead of asking, okay, do you feel better now? Because the presumptive language helps with the process. And once the answer is yes, you still feel those emotions, you instruct the client to float forward on their timeline, sprinkling down those positive lessons and positive learnings, holding on to the positive emotions all the way from that event, all the way until the present moment. And when you get to the present moment, throw those positive lessons, learnings like a bowling ball into the indefinite future on your timeline, and then float back into your body right now, seeing, hearing, and feeling as you feel right now. And at this point, this is where you hold on to that emotional state before that event. And this is what releases the emotions. So based on what I said right there, like, obviously I've done this a lot, so I just went really quickly. From you hearing, is there anything that needs clarification on that?
No, that was pretty clear, actually.
Cool.
The whole thing.
So just like the quick recap, just because I know I did speak
Sure.
quickly and like people like recaps, you focus on whatever the unwanted emotion is, float up out of your body, float back in time, whatever pictures or symbols come to mind or the scene, you look down on it, you extract any positive lessons or learnings away from it, you float an hour before that event, float down into your eyes, fully associated, seeing, hearing, and feeling the emotions before. Notice how the negative emotions are gone. Float back up, float above the event, notice what's changed and how you still feel the positive emotions. Then float forward in time, holding the positive lessons and learnings, sprinkling it down on your entire timeline, every event between that in the present moment and all the way into the future, and then coming back to the present moment. And the one thing I kind of want to add about the timeline is in the unconscious mind, time is not real and it's always the present moment. So I know a lot of people, they read the book, The Power of Now, where it's always the present moment and it's like the universe is more like a movement of energy as opposed to flowing through time, if that makes sense. And then
Yes.
with the unconscious mind, that's how we tell the difference between past and future. So the key is getting to that emotional state of before the event. And so there are more like detailed advanced techniques for this, such as if I know one person, he displays anger towards his son. Whenever his son like does something he doesn't like, he like punches holes in walls, and he's like a really angry person. And it turned out we had to go back to some event in his life where his father was angry to him, and had to have him float up on his father's timeline and go back like 3 generations to like a great grandfather who maybe had like a bad day at work or something and took the anger out on his grandfather, and somehow that carried through his genealogy into there. So by going into different people's timelines, or if you believe or your clients believe in past lives, you could float back like 47 different lives and go in timelines there. But those are kind of more advanced techniques, which I'll talk about differently. But for the basics, the timeline is in the moments or like the hour before some event happened in your life, this negative emotion, this negative behavior, or negative thought or limiting belief did not exist. And this is like the reset switch. So, yeah, assuming like this is my video for I'm going to put in the training course to instruct people for timelines for the first time, do you think any questions pop up for the basic introduction for the technique?
No, the only thing that I'm unclear on is I think it might just be with me, or I might have to experience it, and that is knowing, like, maybe an image doesn't come up, or like you go back in your timeline, or you try to go back in your timeline, and nothing happens. So
Gotcha. So that's more into like representational systems, where I had one friend where we tried to have him picture him on a scene like on a beach in Italy, and he couldn't bring up a visual. So he said, all right, imagine you're on the beach right there and feel the emotions of being on the beach. Feel where the sun is coming from. Is it to the right, to the left, above you, where is it? And once he felt the sun, he could bring up the visual. So that's how you could strengthen like one like
gotcha.
underperforming representational system. But in that case, if a client that you work with has trouble bringing up a visual, that's where I usually go back to the EFT and the tapping technique to release emotions that way, because it all really comes down to releasing the emotions. And if someone has trouble bringing up a visual, that's where you have different tools and resources. So in that case, I'd go with EFT, or there's a number of other emotional release techniques for that.
Okay.
Was your question mainly as far as like someone having trouble bringing up a visual, or?
Yeah,
Okay,
just
yeah.
like as if you're trying to do this timeline thing and it's not working for some reason. That's the only reason I can think of that it wouldn't work for me, at least.
Gotcha. Yeah, so that's where I usually default to like the EFT and something else. But yeah, we'll make another video about how to strengthen underperforming representational systems, because I have one friend who's had that issue where he couldn't bring up the visuals, but then he made some changes in his life and now he's easily able to bring it up. And I think that goes into chakra systems and other like spiritual type practices, but I'll talk to him and see how he did that. Okay, so right there is the timeline release technique, and this is one of the fundamental tools that you'll be using as a practitioner. So whether it's an unwanted thought, such as a limiting belief, a limiting behavior where someone might display anger when it doesn't make sense, or they might crave junk food when they know they don't want to, or if it's some type of emotion from something that came up in the moments before that significant event, that emotion didn't exist. And this is a very quick and instant way to tap into your unconscious and release these emotions. So what you should do right now is go into your workbook, and there's an entire section on the timeline release technique, which will summarize everything I talked about in this video, and go back through this video and make sure you master this technique, because this is one of the building blocks for a lot of the changes that you're going to make. And like I mentioned briefly earlier, there's a lot of more advanced skills that are going to work on top of this. But this is the fundamental tools, and when we get to more the master practitioner level training, we'll go into more details on the very specifics to fine-tune the skills that you're going through. So do this, go through the video again if you want to, go through the workbook, and with that being said, I'll see you on the next video.